Brother set me up to take the blame for a crime he committed. Said it's for your own good. I hacked his phone, found proof of his guilt, and got him arrested. He's now serving life without parole. My name is Enzo, and if you'd told me a year ago that I'd be sitting here writing this, unraveling all the knots my brother, Leo, tied around my life, I wouldn't have believed you. But after what happened, I have to get this story out, not just for anyone reading it, but for myself, too. You see, this isn't the kind of family drama where everyone hugs it out in the end and goes to Sunday dinner as if nothing happened. No, this is the kind that changes everything, the kind that makes you wonder if blood really is thicker than water. I grew up just outside of Chicago in a traditional Italian-American family that put family above everything. La familia, my father would say, pounding a thick finger on the table for emphasis. We had all the usual family values, and our parents made sure we understood them early on: loyalty, respect, keeping our family matters private, and helping each other no matter what. My brother Leo and I were close growing up, but as we got older, our paths took different turns. Me? I took the straightforward route. Went to trade school, got into construction, and worked my way up. Nothing glamorous, but it was honest work, and it paid well enough. By the time I hit 30, I had some savings stashed, a decent car, and a clear plan to finally get my own place. A small house, nothing big or fancy, just something of my own. Leo, though. He was a different story. He was that guy with a million ideas and no follow-through. He always had some get-rich-quick scheme up his sleeve. One month he was flipping designer sneakers, the next he was day trading stocks he didn't understand. Leo always seemed to have an angle, a way to make fast cash without putting in real work, and every time his latest scheme crashed and burned, he'd fall back on family to bail him out. Our parents always caved, giving him loans he never repaid, or smoothing over messes he'd made in the neighborhood. "Ma, he's gotta learn someday," I'd tell her, but she'd just wave me off, her voice laced with guilt. "Enzo, you know Leo's just. He's still finding his way, that's all." And I'd let it go, every time, because he was my little brother, and somewhere deep down, I kept hoping he'd grow out of it. But I always kept my distance, financially speaking. There was no way I was going to hand over my hard-earned money to him just to watch it vanish into thin air. Then, one Friday night, just as I was getting home from work, I got a call from Leo. His voice was frantic, jittery, the kind of tone that sent a chill up my spine. "Enzo, man, I'm in a bit of a jam. Can we meet?" I sighed, already wary. "Leo, what kind of jam are we talking about here?" "It's nothing big," he said quickly, but his voice didn't sound convincing. I need a place to crash for the night. That's all." I could have said no. I knew I should have said no. But something in his voice made me pause. So, like a fool, I agreed. We met at a late-night diner on the edge of town, and when he walked in, he looked rough, disheveled, pale, and nervous. He was carrying a black duffel bag, which he kept fidgeting with, looking over his shoulder every few minutes. I'd never seen him like this, and that made my stomach twist. "Hey," I greeted him as he slid into the booth across from me. "You look like hell, Leo." He gave me a half-hearted smirk. "You're too kind, Enzo. I've had a rough couple of days." I raised an eyebrow. "What kind of trouble are you in?" He shrugged, trying to play it cool, but his eyes darted around the diner, like he was expecting someone to burst in at any second. "It's just a misunderstanding. You know how it is." "Misunderstanding?" I scoffed. "Leo, you look like you're about to jump out of your skin. What's in the bag?" He pulled the duffel closer to him, his fingers tightening on the handle. "Nothing you need to worry about, all right? I need you to keep it for me. Just for a few days, Enzo." "Keep it? Leo, what's in there?" My voice was getting louder, and a couple of people turned to look at us. "Lower your voice," he hissed, glancing around nervously. "Look, it's just some stuff. Important stuff. Can't I just ask my own brother for a favor without getting the third degree?" His words stung, and I felt my shoulders relax a bit, even though my gut was still screaming at me to get out of there. But this was Leo. My kid brother. I'd pulled him out of so many jams over the years that this felt almost normal. Like, maybe he was in some kind of minor trouble again and just needed a place to lay low. "Fine," I muttered, against every ounce of better judgment I had. "But only for a few days, Leo. And after that, you're coming back for it. You hear me?" He gave me a relieved smile, clasping my shoulder. "Thanks, Enzo. You're a lifesaver. I mean it." I took the duffel bag home that night, tucked it in the back of my closet, and didn't think much more of it. But 2 days later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, my world came crashing down. I was cooking a late breakfast when I heard the pounding on my front door. I opened it to find 3 police officers standing there, one with a warrant in hand. "Mr. Enzo Mancini?" one of them asked, and I could feel the dread building in my stomach. "Yeah, that's me," I replied, my voice shaky. "We have a warrant to search the premises," he said. "We have reason to believe you're in possession of stolen property and involved in fraudulent activities." "Wait, what?" I stammered, panic setting in. "This has to be some kind of mistake. I don't." Before I could finish, they pushed past me, heading straight for the closet. It was like they knew exactly where to look. Within seconds, they pulled out Leo's black duffel bag and opened it. Inside were stacks of cash, counterfeit documents, and what looked like high-end electronics. My heart plummeted as I realized what was happening. "Sir, you're under arrest for possession of stolen property and conspiracy to commit fraud," the officer said, snapping handcuffs onto my wrists. "But this isn't mine," I protested, my voice trembling. "That bag, it belongs to my brother. He asked me to hold onto it for him." "Your brother?" The officer raised an eyebrow. "Where is he now?" I opened my mouth to respond but realized I had no idea. Leo hadn't contacted me since that night at the diner. He'd gone radio silent, leaving me holding the bag, literally and figuratively. The interrogation was brutal. They didn't believe a word I said. To them, it was clear-cut, I'd been caught red-handed with the evidence. They threw questions at me for hours, trying to get me to confess, but I kept insisting that I had nothing to do with it. At one point, the lead detective leaned across the table, giving me a hard stare. "So you're telling us that you just happened to be holding a duffel bag full of stolen property for your brother? And you didn't think to ask any questions?" "I know how it sounds," I said, my voice breaking. "But he's my brother. I thought he was just in some small trouble, that he needed help." The detective scoffed. "And you expect us to believe you're just an innocent bystander? That you had no idea?" I shook my head, feeling the weight of it all crashing down. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. Leo had set me up, plain and simple. And the worst part? He'd done it so perfectly, so meticulously, that I almost had to admire his twisted skill. By the time they finally let me go, I felt like I'd aged 10 years. They hadn't formally charged me, but the detective made it clear they were watching me closely. If anything else came up, I'd be their first suspect. And that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was realizing that Leo had planned this. He'd used me, set me up as his scapegoat without a second thought. I got back to my empty apartment that night and just sat there in silence, staring at the mess of my life. All those years I'd spent helping him, covering for him, cleaning up after his messes. It all came crashing back, each memory like a slap to the face. A few days later, I finally tracked him down. He was hiding out at a friend's place, looking as smug as ever. When he saw me, he actually had the nerve to smile. "Enzo." He greeted me like nothing was wrong. "What's up, big brother?" I felt my fists clench. "What's up?" "Leo, the cops raided my place. They found your bag, with all your crap inside it. Do you have any idea what they're trying to pin on me?" He shrugged, that infuriating smirk still on his face. "Relax, Enzo. It's nothing serious. They'll let you off the hook." "Let me off the hook?" I could feel my blood boiling. "Leo, they think I'm involved in fraud. They're talking about conspiracy charges. Do you understand what that means?" He waved a dismissive hand. "You're overreacting. Look, they don't have anything solid on you. Worst case, you get a slap on the wrist. You'll be fine." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I felt like I was staring at a stranger, not the kid I'd grown up with, not the brother I'd protected all these years. I stood there, staring at Leo, his smug grin twisting my stomach into knots. This was the guy I'd defended my whole life. Every time someone warned me he was bad news, every time he'd messed up and I'd stood up for him, I believed he'd eventually grow up. But this? This was beyond anything I could have imagined. "Leo, you set me up," I said quietly, my voice cold. "You tried to destroy my life to save your own skin." He rolled his eyes, leaning back with that arrogant, lazy confidence that made my blood boil. "Oh, please, Enzo. Drama queen much? It's not like you'll actually go to jail. You're the good one, remember? They won't believe you're a criminal. You'll walk out of this fine." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep myself calm. But something inside me snapped. I realized he'd never felt 1 ounce of loyalty to me. In his mind, I was just a useful tool, a convenient scapegoat whenever he messed up. Family was just a word he used to manipulate, to control. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "You know what, Leo?" I said, forcing a smile. "Maybe you're right. Maybe it's not such a big deal." He looked at me, his smug grin widening. "See? That's the spirit, Enzo. Just chill out. This'll all blow over soon." I nodded, keeping my tone casual. "Yeah, you're right. I'll let it go." But deep inside, I was done. I'd made excuses for him my whole life, but this time, he'd gone too far. And I was going to make sure he paid for it. After I left, I didn't go back home. Instead, I started putting together a plan. I knew that with all the tricks Leo had pulled over the years, he'd left more than a few loose threads. I just needed to follow them, find his weak spots, and unravel his life the way he'd tried to unravel mine. For the next few weeks, I became a man on a mission. I dug into every scrap of his life I could find, talking to people, tracking down old business partners, following his digital trail. I went through my entire contact list, tracking down anyone who'd ever worked with him, done him a favor, or had any sort of grudge. I spent long hours online, studying his emails, hacking into his accounts, digging up every dirty deal, every shady partnership he'd ever been part of. One night, I sat down with all the information I'd collected. There it was in black and white, a list of all the crimes he'd committed over the years, from minor scams to full-blown fraud. I found documents with his signature on loans he'd forged, emails where he'd bragged to friends about dodging taxes, even encrypted files detailing every under-the-table deal he'd ever struck. The most damning piece of evidence, though, was a series of emails where he discussed plans to frame me if anything ever went south. He'd actually written it out, step by step, detailing how he'd plan evidence in my apartment, make fake calls from my phone, and keep his hands clean. Reading those words felt like a punch to the gut, but it also fueled my resolve. I was going to bury him with his own dirt. My first move was to go to his business partners, all those unsavory characters he'd worked with over the years. Some were reluctant at first, but once I hinted at the amount of evidence I had, and the deals I could expose them in, they were willing to play ball. I cut deals with them, promising to keep their names out if they cooperated. They were only too happy to give me more dirt on Leo, things even I hadn't known. Every bit of information became another nail in his coffin. After I had everything, I went to the police, but this time I was smart about it. I didn't just walk in and hand them the evidence. I reached out to a detective I knew, someone who'd had it out for Leo ever since he'd slithered his way out of charges a few years back. Detective Martinez was a tough, no-nonsense cop who hated people like Leo. And when I laid out everything I had, she listened intently, her eyes gleaming with the kind of satisfaction I hadn't felt in weeks. "This is a gold mine, Enzo," she said, flipping through the files. "We'll get him this time." But I wasn't done yet. You see, it wasn't enough to have him arrested. I wanted him to suffer, to lose everything he'd spent his life trying to con his way into. So I set up the final stage of my plan. Over the next few days, I started leaking bits and pieces of his shady dealings to his so-called friends and associates, the ones who still trusted him. I'd send anonymous emails, leaving just enough clues for them to figure out he was the reason they'd lost money, or why their last business deal went south. It didn't take long for them to turn on him. Leo's network of friends disintegrated overnight. People refused to take his calls, blocked him on social media, even spread rumors about him in our old neighborhood. He was done, and he didn't even know it yet. But the real kicker? The part that made this revenge so satisfying? Leo had no idea I was behind it. In his mind, everything was falling apart by pure bad luck. Then came the final blow. Detective Martinez called him in for questioning, under the pretense of clearing up a minor detail in one of his past business ventures. Leo, being the narcissist he was, walked right into the trap. They arrested him on the spot, slapping him with charges of fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and several other counts. It was a mountain of evidence, airtight and damning. He called me from the station that night, sounding more desperate than I'd ever heard him. "Enzo, they're trying to pin all this on me," he shouted, his voice cracking. "You gotta help me, man, you know me, they've got it all wrong." I held the phone close, savoring the sound of his panic, his desperation. "Oh, I know you, Leo," I replied calmly. "Better than you think." "What's that supposed to mean?" he snapped, his voice laced with confusion. "It means you're finally reaping what you sowed, brother," I said, my voice cold as ice. "And this time, there's no one coming to bail you out." There was silence on the other end, and I could almost picture him standing there, mouth open, finally realizing that everything had crumbled because of me. That I'd been the one pulling the strings, making him fall from the life he'd scammed his way into. You did this?" he whispered, barely audible. "I just finished what you started, Leo. You wanted to play dirty? Well, you played with the wrong person this time. Enzo. You're my brother." He choked out, his voice wavering. I let out a humorless laugh. "Yeah, and I spent my whole life being loyal to you, cleaning up your messes. But you know what? Family isn't about loyalty to people who don't deserve it. This is for every lie, every betrayal. And you know what? It's for my own good." The line went dead, and I hung up, feeling a sense of peace settle over me that I hadn't felt in years. Leo ended up being convicted on multiple counts, sentenced to decades in prison. He was denied bail, his assets were seized, and his reputation was ruined. Even our parents finally saw him for who he was. They didn't condone what I'd done, but they understood why I'd done it. Leo would rot behind bars, cut off from the life he'd built on lies, and every time he looked at those prison bars, he'd remember that I put him there. As for me? I walked away from it all, feeling lighter, freer than ever. It hadn't been easy, but for the first time, I'd finally put myself first. I was no longer Enzo, the sucker, the loyal brother who would do anything to help. I was Enzo, the man who finally took control of his own life.